Alrighty, welcome back here to the final video in the course support complete repair and replacement series. This is 8th video. It's almost an hour long. I've marked sections if you found the replacement course support throughout the video and you're not trying to repair one, you can skip the where everything's applicable. And in near future, I'm going to post with the description of each video detailed on my website, which is allenmytc.com, and also have it on there. I'm sorry it took so long to get these all together. I posted the first video last, I believe it was June or July, but it was a very involved project if you watch through the videos on all the rust repair, and then with working another job, and I've decided at 46 years old to go to college, so that's been keeping me busy. But right now it's summer break and I've got a chance to, even though it's been together this last video, I've had everything taped since January, but it took me till now to get it all put together. And thank you for watching, and thank you for the support of the channel. To begin with, let's start routing some of our wiring. Driver's side is the place to start, since it all originates out of the master harness from the driver's side, and installing the wiring harness in the first clip by the battery tray. Now I'm going to install 2 ground cables to the course support. Installing any ground wire, it's a good idea to sand clean the area up so you make a good ground connection and it's no corrosion. This van, there's 2 different size ground clamps on the driver's side. One is actually right to your battery negative cable, and the other one is a smaller ground cable. And install the bolts and then tighten those both up. Now I'm going to install some more wiring harness and clips. Notice these are smaller clips than the one over by the battery tray. There's various sizes which coincide with the size of your wire harness loom that it sits in. Now route the wiring out for the headlights. You can see, well, I actually marked, but if you're working on one of these vans, or probably even like a Silverado, you can see the headlight plug-ins, and they come out through the top hole. And the turn signal and parking light come out through the lower hole in the front of the course support. Okay, the wires I'm holding in my hand are for the horns and the outside temperature sensor. Now, this part of the wiring harness comes out through the front of the course support in the sort of triangular shaped hole. And in my case, I'll have to drill holes for my harness, because this part of the course support has been refabricated with new metal because the original area was rusted. I mark with a marker, and then I'm first going to drill an 1/8 inch hole. And the 1/8 inch hole will be followed by a 3/16 inch hole, and the 3/16 inch hole will accommodate the wire clips. And now from the rear of the course support, we'll also have to do the same as on the front. These are a different style. These are actually taped to the harnesses clip, but have to drill 2 3/16 inch holes, starting with the 1/8 inch bits. Clearance is tight, and on the one I actually had to use the 90-degree angle air drill to access it. Now, getting closer to the passenger side on our wiring, and time to install another ground wire. Just as before, clean the area up and install the bolt with the wire end on it and tighten it up. Then I'm going to put some more of the harness into the wire fasteners and clip them in place by pushing down. And on the passenger side is just the same as the driver's side. The headlight wires come out through the top hole, and the turn signal and the parking light lens comes out through the bottom hole. And it's time to get the radiator ready for installation. The oil cooler lines use an O-ring. Be sure it is in place before installing if you had to remove yours. In my situation, due to corrosion, it was a necessity to turn the fitting out of the radiator on some of these fittings. The transmission cooler fittings do not use O-rings, but a flared end. Due to the corrosion, I needed to replace one of the clips. It disintegrated when I pried it out. Buy this assortment at a parts store. The part number on it, Quick Connect 800-801, and this came from AutoZone. Slide these wire clips in the groove around the adapter. When the clip is properly in place, the curved up lips sit inside. This is what grips the end of the cooler lines to keep them from pulling back out. Now time to turn the fittings in. Use some pipe thread sealant and coat the threads on any adapter that was removed and needs reinstalled. I started using the brush, but I found your fingers work better at this job than the brush. Start the fitting in with your fingers and making sure not to cross thread, since it does just fit into a plastic radiator tank, and finish tightening with the wrench. I'm using a line wrench, a 19mm on the transmission cooler lines. Tighten these fittings snug, but do not over tighten, since these sit in the plastic tank and it wouldn't take probably too much effort. You could break them right out of the tank. Now is an excellent time, while thinking of it, to tighten the radiator drain. Tighten the drain first with your fingers and then lightly snug up with pliers. Now I have to install one of the oil cooler line fittings. I had to remove both of the transmission cooler ones and one of the oil coolers. These are the same with the exception, as mentioned earlier, the O-ring. And they do require a larger wrench to tighten. And here's the radiator bushings that sit in the core support radiator bracket. Be sure the rubber bushings are in place. You want to sit these radiator mounts in the holes as shown. Carefully work the radiator down in place. You might have to turn, twist, move some items such as wires to clear it away. Just be careful and don't break the radiator. The radiator is now installed in place at the bottom. If properly installed, the radiator has brackets that protrude through the core support. The AC condenser mounts to these. Slide the radiator hose on next. This is easy access time, and it also helps hold the radiator in place. Now time to install the AC condenser. The AC condenser bolts to the radiator are 4 places. Tighten AC condenser bolts working back and forth evenly until they are all tightened up. Lightly coat the AC line O-ring with refrigerant oil if available. If not, you can get away with transmission fluid. On this, the air conditioning hasn't worked in years. I don't even know why I'm worried about it, but who knows, maybe one day I'll fix it. And just repeat on the other air conditioning line on the condenser. On the other line on this AC condenser, though, will require 2 wrenches to tighten. You will need one to hold the fitting and one to tighten so it does not break off while tightening it. Now it's time to install this plastic shield, and absolutely, this will try your patience. The shield holds the power steering return hose in place. After some manipulating, twisting and turning, the power steering line is in position. Now it's time to install the shield to the van. I'm going to hold the support up in place and mark with the marker, and start by drilling 2 holes. As always, start with an 1/8 inch pilot hole and work your way up by a few different drill bits. Originally, there were nuts welded the inside of the core support to hold the stone shield. Since mine was rusted away in this area and the shield was hanging by the power steering return line, I never gave this a thought during the core support rebuild. To use 5/16 inch speed nuts, like I am, requires a 3/8 inch hole drilled. Putting the speed nut in the hole that was drilled, I marked the edge of the speed nut. Now it's time to drill another hole in the process of getting the speed nut to work. After drilling the hole, I worked with the Dremel tool with the cutter wheel. The objective is to get the speed nut to slide in place. It's just going to require some patience grinding working with the Dremel tool back and forth. And now I'm going to do some grinding with the angle air grinder. If I would have found a good used core support, this would not have been necessary. Yeah, I know, the hole wasn't the nicest looking. And finally, I gained enough room to install the speed nut. This is the objective of what I was doing, and the speed nut, as I said, is installed. And see, the bolt turns right into the speed nut and will hold the stone shield in place. Now, same old deal on the passenger side. An alternative idea, if you're fabricating a core support and do not want to do it this way, you could use self-tapping sheet metal screws. They don't hold the best. Or this would be probably the one if I wanted to do it an easier way. You could use a larger rivet, say a 3/16 1/4 inch rivet would have been another option. But at least this way, if for whatever reason you'd have to take it back apart, you will be able to take it apart. After installing the speed nuts, you will need to find 2 5/16 inch bolts and 2 flat washers if you had a refabricate such as myself. And use 1 flat washer on each bolt. Lining the stone shield up will try one's patience. The problem, the power steering return hose wanted to keep pulling down while you needed to pull the stone shield up in place. For reassembly, I'm going to remove the fan and clutch. The tool here for holding the water pump pulley, this fan clutch holding tool, I couldn't really show you in the video because no way to get the camera in while working, but is in the photo. Use 2 of the water pump pulley bolts and hold, and then you use the fan clutch wrench to turn the fan on this vehicle counterclockwise loose. Now I'm going to install the transmission cooler lines. Pushing the cooler lines in until you feel them snap in place. And I always like to make sure they're holding good. Pull back on the line, and if the line does not pull back out, you'll be fine. And you can, again, when you push them in, sort of here, if you listen real careful, a little clicking sound if you were successful. And the transmission cooler lines have these plastic snap ring guards, but at least on my vehicle, the oil cooler did not use these. Now push in and install the oil cooler lines as with the transmission cooler lines. Now I'm going to reinstall the radiator hose. Earlier, put the hose back on temporarily to get the air conditioning condenser, but now the air conditioning condenser is holding the radiator in place, and it was in the way to put the lower transmission cooler line. And of course, do not forget to tighten the hose clamp. And the lower shroud sits in these rectangular shaped holes in the stone shield. And here's the tabs in the shroud that line up with the holes in the stone shield. Putting the fan back on is quite simple. Hold the fan clutch and turn the fan back on, hand tightening using the clutch of the fan. Make sure the fan's not hitting the shroud. If you would have bought one of these already that was not rusted and was not fabricating, for sure it should be fine. But in my case, and it is fine, since I had to drill holes and redesign, just wanted to be sure it wasn't any clearance issues between the shroud and the fan. Now use the fan clutch wrench again and tighten the fan to the water pump. And the locating dowels on the upper radiator shroud line up with the holes in 4 places in the lower radiator shroud. And make sure the upper shroud radiator bushings line up with the top of the aluminum housing right before it goes into the plastic tank. And then push the shroud towards the front of the vehicle. After lining the shroud up, it's time to bolt the shroud back together. Start by installing the bolts in the holes that hold the upper and the lower shroud together. Initially, just start turning the bolts in by finger, and then I used the combination of 2 extensions to reach the bolts. And as I'm doing, if you have one wobble extension, makes it easier to access the bolts by providing some freedom of movement to work the socket around to get on the bolts. These vans are not blessed with room. And I started by tightening the rear one on the passenger side, but it does not really matter whichever you want to start one. Then next work to the front driver's side, and then just alternate back and forth diagonally until all the bolts are tightened up. And don't ever tighten them because they're not too hard. You'll break those clips out of the plastic. Next we're going to install the bolts that face towards the front of the vehicle that hold the upper the upper shroud to the core support. Then install the upper radiator hose, and be sure if you're working on an Astro or Safari, the hose routes underneath the master cylinder, just as I'm showing. And don't forget to tighten the clamp. Have it be a mess when you go to use it. Now I want to install the overflow combination washer fluid jug. And since I fixed this core support, and the hole that was originally here to support the locating stud on the bottom of the washer jug and overflow tank is no longer there, I'm going to drill a hole to accommodate it. I started with an 1/8 inch hole from the top, and then I'm going to finish drilling the hole up from the inner fender. The hole needs to be roughly 7/8 inch in diameter, and I had trouble making the hole since I kept drilling into my seam welded on the top. Using an air grinder, I reamed the hole out, made it large enough, just sort of worked at it, and finally it slid down into place. Right now the hole is more than large enough, and before set this overflow and washer fluid jug in place, plug the wires in for the front and the rear washers and make sure they clip into place, and then reinstall the washer fluid hoses for both of them. I marked mine when I took it apart, front and rear. The front one sits down lower, the ones that go to the front washer, than the rear one sits. It sits up higher. It's a little bit of a warning you're getting low in washer fluid. If your rear quits, your front will work for a little bit. And then set it back down to that hole that was made and push it down into place until at the top you can put the clip into place. It's against the core support, and then just press that down in and hook up your hose to the overflow tank. Slide the plastic clip back on in place. Alrighty, next up we're going to install the air cleaner. Here's the bottom part. The 3 holes in the housing sit into the 3 studs in the upper radiator shroud, and then that one little bracket comes off, sits on the extra stud, and you want to fit those little rubber bushings down on the little tabs on each one while you're doing it. My one bushing there is tore, giving me a half. And install the air cleaner itself, the air filter. Make sure your wires are out of the way for the idle air control valve and the mass airflow sensor. Then take the rubber duct work that goes to the air cleaner. There's a notch in the throttle body, the plastic housing, that lines up with the notch in the rubber duct. And just push it back on. Sits back in, sort of a pain to get to. And then put the upper part of the air cleaner housing in. Those tabs at the back slide in. Can be a pain to get in, and once you have it lined up, redo your latches on the front, hook it at the top, push down as I'm doing in the photo, and then we can hook up our idle air control valve. Make sure it clicks in place, and our mass airflow sensor. Alrighty, now we want to tighten up the clamp where the duct work goes on the piece that comes off the throttle body. I'm using a little ratcheting wrench. The quarters are tight. Now I'm going to put this center brace on in the front temporarily. Since I fixed my core support, I lost the lower mounting hole because it's all new metal welded. What I'm doing here is lining it up that it's level straight up and down, since the top hole is known, it hasn't been changed. And then I'm going to make a bracket to hold the horn. The horn originally actually would have been more holes to make in the core support, and I didn't really want to do that. And here I'm cutting the piece of metal I measured. Okay, and we have that cut. Rush the area up where I'm going to be welding the piece of bracket to that I had cut out. Get that rust cleaned up good, so like I say, it'll weld good. And then after it's welded, it'll, like I say, hold paint nice then, and hopefully won't get so rusty. And I'm going to take this little wire clip out. It's in my way to grind, and definitely come weld, and it would have took and melted when I weld that bracket on. Again, if you're not fixing one of these from scratch, you wouldn't have to do this. Alrighty, now I'm going to take the piece of metal I cut for the horn bracket and clean it up with the flapper disc on the angle grinder so it welds good. And like I say, make it, again, when you paint it, a nice surface to paint to. And do both sides and work around the edges like I am and make it nice and smooth. And you see how I'm using the C-clamp in the bench vise. I feel it's an easy way to hold a thinner piece of metal. Now we have the piece that gets welded to that's supporting the front of the van, and I'm going to take and use a pair of vice grips, one corner, then the other one. Then I'm going to use my little pair in this corner, and I'm out of vice grips. I'm going to finish up with a small C-clamp. I probably had another pair, but this will work just the same. Now we're going to take and tack it in place so we can get rid of our clamping arrangement to have more room to weld. Makes life a whole lot easier. And get a little bit on both sides. Okay, now I'm going to take and get rid of the clamps, wire brush it, and then finish welding the seam. Again, with no clamps in the way to get in your way, and you just work the whole seam down through. It's probably about 16 gauge metal. It's not real hard to weld, not like welding sheet metal. And then in between the weld, just clean it with your wire brush. Get rid of that flux if you're using the flux wire such as myself. And then we're going to do the other side. And there's the rear of it. You can see it welded the seam. It burned through. I mean, it didn't really burn through, but you can see where I welded there the back side of it. No burn through, but that's about how it should look. Now clamp it in upside down, and I'm going to weld the little corners where the metal meets. It sort of sits down in a valley. You can't actually do it straight across, but do those. This will help strengthen it from the rear. Alrighty, there's our completed weld from the front. And now you can see a look at the rear of it. And there's what I was saying about those little corners at each spot. And here I temporarily bolted it in. And I'm going to mark where we're going to drill the holes for the horn mount. Again, originally the horns were mounted directly to the core support, but that was rusted out and changed. And instead of making more holes in the core support, I thought this bracket was an answer. Drill a pilot hole. And I'm going to move up to a 3/16 bit. And eventually on these, it's going to be 5/16 inch hole. And here's the final hole being drilled. And then just repeat on the other side. I'm going to take and put some paint on it now before I bolt the horns on. Let that dry a little bit, about 2 light coats. Alrighty, now I'm going to take and make the hole in the van for the speed nut. That's why I made the bracket for the horn. I didn't want to have to do the horns plus this. This is enough work in itself. And earlier in the video, I did this same principle when that plastic piece that the drill's resting against we mounted back in. The first hole for the speed nut needs to be 3/8 inch diameter. And then I'm going to mark the shape of the speed nut, make a spot where I'm going to drill the pilot hole at the top. And same deal, starting with the 1/8 inch drill bit, I'm going to make the first hole. Then after you get this hole, the objective's to make it large enough to be able to work the speed nut in. I'm going to use the die angle grinder and start reaming the hole out. And just patience and going a little bit at a time. Just keep working at it until you get it that it will slide down in. Again, the objective is going to slide in at the top and push down in, and not quite yet. And now we're going to tap it in and see if it works this time. And we have accomplished. And that's the objective what you're looking for. And now we're going to bolt the horns to the bracket. Just push the bolt up through is what I chose. Put another flat washer on and your nut. And just repeat for the other horn. And just take and tighten them up good. Like I say, the 5/16 bolts are the 1/2 inch socket and wrench. Snug those up. And we're going to take and bolt this whole bracket back to the core support of the van. Like I say, with the speed nut, you can just take and where we put in at the bottom, start to bolt in, and it'll work just like the factory. Won't have to hold no, well, with the enclosed at the bottom of the core support, just putting the bolt on the back wasn't an option anyhow because you couldn't access it. And then tighten those up. Then hook our wires back up. That's the one for the sensor that tells the temperature, the external temperature in our horns. And that route the wires out of the way. And we're all set. Alrighty, now it's time to put the front bumper back on. Have it laying here on my creeper. Just demonstration, there's the brackets that's going to be bolting up to the subframe. Get a bolt ready. Alrighty, and there's a picture of the subframe. And going to take and lift the bumper up into place. And it's going to take a little bit of maneuvering to get it positioned. A second set of hands would be probably a help on it, but you can get it yourself. You just have to work carefully. And again, that's why I got the bolt ready, so when you do get it, you can get a bolt, even if it's not actually threaded into the spot, it'll help hold it in place. And it's a pretty snug fit once you get it pushed back on. It sort of holds itself, but I wouldn't trust walking away from it. Alrighty, there I got one partially in, and now I'm going to get one in on the other side. And then that'll give me a chance to get it properly positioned and not have to worry about it falling off of the van. And you can see you can rock it back and forth accordingly. I'm looking here from underneath to see how close I am lined up. Now, when they go in to stay in, put a washer on the bolts. Now, for the temporary, because I'll just pull it back out when I get the one in place, I just did it not using the washer. Yeah, the factory bolts actually had a washer head built on them, but I had to replace mine. They were too rusty to reuse. And here you can see I'm having a little difficulty on this upper bolt on the driver's side, but have it started. Now we're going to take the 1/2 inch drive ratchet and get it started turning in. Now put the lower one in on the driver's side with the washer. Alrighty, now I'm going to tighten that lower bolt up with, like I say, 1/2 inch drive ratchet, and it definitely is not going to fall off the van anymore, the bumper. And we're going to move on over to the passenger side on the van and tighten those up. Now my front top one I'm tightening right now. the nut that was welded to the bracket was in place. Now the bottom one I had to use just the nut, and I'm holding it with a wrench. That was the only one that broke loose, and there it is, all on the van and ready for the next step. Alrighty, now I'm going to put the fenders back on. Starting with the passenger side fender, there's just a general overview of the mounting spots. Show you on the van where all the bolts went. Like I say, there's some in the core support that held the fender. Back at the firewall. And then this one that I get a kick out of, it was hidden way down here. Now I'm going to start lifting the fender on, which is nice and light compared to the bumper, and just put the bolts in finger tight at each spot, starting at the front and then working around, and then finally the hidden one down in the corner. Sorry about the lighting on this photo. I should have brought the light around, and then I'm just going to go tighten them up gradually. And I can say make sure the fender's lining up where it was, check your door alignment and snug them all up, and then we're going to go put the driver's side fender on next. And I have the room for the camera. I didn't show the other one being lifted on because it was against the wall. I don't have the room, but fender just lifts like up and over, and it'll stay there on its own, and then putting that lower bolt in, weighing the bottom of the fender. And then the one up at the top of the fender right behind the driver's door mirror. Going to put the two in at the firewall, just finger tight for right now. And then I'm going to put the front one in at the front edge of the fender. And on this, I didn't show it on the other one, the bottom of the fender at the front of the van. Now it's time we're going to tighten these bolts up, starting with the lower one there by the door. I used a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, and then get the one up at the top right by the driver's door mirror, and get these two up on the firewall. And be cautious when you tighten these. Like I say, that's why I'm using the 1/4-inch drive ratchet. They're not that large, and you can snap them off. And move up, and I tightened the front one up at the core support. And I didn't show this on the other side. There's one at the lower front fender. Now on this I have a Phillips head screw in it because mine was rusted away and is a redesign. And now we're going to put the bumper cover on. And just lift it up on. The cover is nothing compared to the bumper itself. Just slide it right in place, and this sort of like will sit there till you get ready to put the fasteners on. Alrighty, and there she be on and in place. Now we're going to take and just put these little tabs at the corner of each bumper up in the holes in the fender. There we go, it's in place. And now, time to take a break. I'm going to put the hood bumper stops in. This is sort of, you need your finger and index finger and give them a couple turns in on each side. Just mainly you don't want to forget them, because afterwards, well, if you go driving, your hood would rattle and be irritating. Alrighty, now is a great time. We're going to put our hood latch on. And if you're reinstalling the same core support like I am, it should line up. You can see where the washers of the bolt tightened into the latch. Now, there, if you buy a replacement, there is a theory that it might be more of a chance it would need adjusted, just the differences in manufacturing. But in my case, since I couldn't find a rust-free one, that's one plus of all the extra work. Alright, now I'm going to put the clips in and hold the bumper. Just push it down in the hole, then push the centerpiece in. That's right in the middle on the front of the bumper. Then I'm going to put the one in on the driver's side here on the top, and just push it down in. And there's one right there by the horns, and one over on the passenger side, but I'm going to let those go for now and get one in underneath that sticks straight in from the bottom, right in the middle. And this is a pretty simple step, and then just put them all in place. There's the other one in the bottom, and the one on the passenger side in the bottom. Now on this originally, I'm going to use a rivet and washer. My edge of the fender was rusted off. I had it fixed. There was a speed nut, but the spot rusted away, and I just replaced it with a piece of metal, drilled a 3/16 inch hole, and using a 3/16 inch rivet. And going to do the same thing on the driver's side. I did maneuver in on the driver's side with my bigger rivet gun, because that little one with this 3/16 steel rivet was hard to break them, but that worked a lot easier. Now get one of your bolts that hold the grill in, 7mm head. Lift this up in. It's light, it's just sort of awkward, and it's fairly fragile. You don't want to drop it and break it. And once you get it positioned, grab the little nut and turn one in, and then it'll stay in place. And there it is, all ready to go. All right, now we're going to put the little bolts that hold the grill in. That's the one we did do. Now the one on the top on the passenger side. And there's one down in the corner on the driver's side. One in the outside corner. These two you don't see till the parking light's out. And then same deal on the passenger side, the one at the lower bottom. And tighten that up. And then the one at the outer bottom on the passenger side. And one right in the middle, hidden down below the GMC emblem in the grill. And now we're ready to take and put the parking light lens in. First install our parking light bulb, then our turn signal bulb, then grab the housing, then push in the parking light bulb, give it a half a turn, and same with the turn signal bulb, half a turn clockwise. Make sure this tab lines up, slide it right into the grill, then push it back against the van. Put your screws in. They're Phillips head screws in the top and bottom. Nose up securely. Alright, now we're going to move on. Put the parking light and the turn signal bulb on the passenger side, and inserting turn signal bulb half a turn clockwise till it clicks in place. Then install our parking light bulb. Then put the assembly in just like the other side, that little tab into the grill. Reinstall the two Phillips head screws that hold the assembly in. I like showing, even though it's the same as the driver's side, I hope you find this helpful showing both sides. Alrighty, our headlight bulb plug-ins. Going to first install the high beam bulb. Just push it back in till it slides and clicks in place. And then we're going to repeat for the low beam headlight bulb, which sits to the outer side of the housing. And same deal, push it into it clicks in place. And there's our, make sure your O-rings are in place so water don't get in behind. Grab the headlight assembly, take the bulb, set it down in the socket with the tabs lined up, and give it a half a turn clockwise till it snaps into place. And same with the high beam bulb. And this next step, slide it back in. And this edge of the fender's being a little contrary, but you just sort of lift up and into place it goes. Install the two self-tapping 10mm head bolts in the top of the house. Okay, now put the bolt in at the hidden behind the reflector lens and tighten that up. This will be the headlight assembly installed. After tightening the two top ones, I just put them in temporarily, just snug those up. And like I say, now it's time to put this little reflector in. Sit the little tab down in the little groove cut in the housing. And this and mine's broke that air, but using the washer, it still tightens up and holds the light. It was that way when I took it apart, and there the reflector's back in. Now we're going to take, and there's our low beam bulb and our high beam. And we're going to take and plug those both back in. Already have the low beam in, now plugging in the high beam light. And just slide it in. The low beam only has one like tooth in it there, and the other one has two. And then put them in, give them the half a turn. And set our housing in. Same as on the other side, going to have to lift up on the fender, and in that goes. And now I'm going to put the two top ones in, tighten those up on both sides on the top. Like I say, these aren't hard to get to. And then we're going to finish up with the one there that sits behind the reflector and tighten that one up. Reflector again, down in the tab. Push it back in, and you can see this one's not broke. Put our bolt in, and we'll tighten that up. Next, they don't want to go crazy on tightening them. You break the plastic, which is probably how the one on this did get broke. And now I just hooked the battery booster up to check the lights. And I do have a burnout parking light. But we went back through and jiggled some wires around and then had to replace the bulb. That didn't work, and they're all working. And we got 4 ways. Now it's time to put these little plastic inner fenders back up in. And I'm going to stick it up in, put the one little screw in the middle, and we're going to tighten that up. And then on this front one, since I welded a piece of metal in, I'm going to have to take and drill a hole. And then we're going to use our little self-tapper on that one. And that's, like I say, got this in so far. Alright, now we're going to put this cover on that protects the engine, the plug wires and that. I use these clips to, I don't think these are the original, and put one up in the front. Now this is the original style there. That other one was one I improvised. Up here I'm going to have to drill a hole because again, new metal used. First starting with an 1/8 inch bit. And then we're going to move up to a 3/16, which is going to turn out is still not going to be large enough on this, but I'm going to have to go to a 1/4 inch. And after it's drilled, we'll push it back in, and there it is in place. Now I'm going to put these rust catchers on. It's more what they are, as you can see. I should fix the rocker panels. That'll be a video in the future. But I'm going to put it back on for now. I spent enough time on this core support. There's a screw that goes there that holds it to the front fender. And that's where I'm going to start to get it to hold into place. And just start to screw in and tighten him up. But underneath, there's push pins that went in. But again, it's pretty rusted up. And then this plastic inner fender piece, you put these push pins in. A self-tapping screw from the front of the fender that holds it. Tighten that up. And like I say, it's starting to get into place. And this originally had a stud sticking on it, but it was messed up, broke, snapped when I went to take it off, so I'm just using a nut and bolt. Phillips head there on the outside and a 7/16 on the inner. It's a 1/4 inch bolt. And once I get the screws tightened up some, I'm just going to use the ratcheting wrench and tighten it up, which makes it easy in a tight place. If you don't have ratcheting wrenches, they're a great investment. And now we're going to put this engine cover on the passenger side. And this one, same deal. That one went right in. Now we're going to take and use the rubber mallet again. Sometimes they push right in, sometimes they don't. And here also have to drill a hole. And I'm going to take and go the 3/16. And this one I must have used a different clip because the 3/16 it fit and it pushes right in. Alright, on this side I decided to put the bolt in from the bottom of the rocker panel on this plastic rust catcher, as I called it first, and let the door shut, sort of hold it in place while you get the bolt started, and put the nut on. Again, if you could do it the other way if you wanted to, like I did on the driver's side, but I found this to go easier. And there's the bolt and the nut sticking on. Now we're going to put the little plastic inner fender splash guard in place, same as the other side. Get it lined up with one of the holes, and we'll take and we'll start the little self-tapping screw in and tighten it up. And just like on the other side, I'm going to have to take and drill a hole because that's new metal. There's no, the original hole went bye-bye, so we'll just drill our 1/8 inch hole, and we'll put in our self-tapper on that one. And then we'll just, again, tighten it up, repeat the process. And same thing, you don't want to make them real tight. They're pretty fine little bolts. You snap them right off, wouldn't take much. Just snug them up good. And now we're going to put the screw in the fender here where the rust catcher meets. And we'll turn it in. And then we'll put the 2 push tabs in after you slide it. There's like a groove that sits in that goes right in between. Then push those in. And again, that's the non-original one, and then I have one of the factory original ones, and then our one from the inside that you have to open the door that holds it to the fender and tighten that up. And now we're going to put this brace on that holds the plastic bumper from flopping around in the corner. Now the bumper hole, well, it's there. And I'm going to snug it up. I was lucky to get that out after it's actually snapped off, but I heated the remains with it off and got it to turn out. But up above, I'm going to have to drill a hole because, again, it's new metal where it mounted to. Yeah, originally there was a speed nut on this, but I'm going to put a 1/4-inch bolt and nut in it, and it'll be more than fine. It's not hard to get to. And starting with the 1/8-inch bit, I'm going to drill an 1/8-inch hole and move up. After I had it marked, I'm going to get the bracket out of my way and drill that through. And there's that one. And we're going to do a 3/16. And then finally we'll do our 1/4-inch after this one. And there's our 1/4-inch. And we're going through. And not the most pleasant place to work, sort of looking up. Be sure you wear safety glasses doing it. Metal shavings flying above your head. And get that nice and cleaned out. And there's our bolt and our nut. And if you've noticed watching this, I use flange nuts where I can. It just makes it easier than not having to mess around with a separate washer. And we'll just tighten it up. Gonna, like I say, I have the Phillips head screw at the bottom and the 7/16 wrench on the top, and snugged him up, and then we'll tighten the factory one here at the bottom of the plastic fender up, and we're all set on that. Like I say, the road salt really packs up in those. If you probably live where it wasn't a salty climate, the world wouldn't come to an end, but probably with salt it would fall off. And now we're going to put the tire and wheel back on the driver's side, and now getting down to the nitty-gritty, getting pretty close to being able to go drive this. It's been a long time in the making. And we're going to tighten our lug nuts up with my trusty Craftsman 19.2 volt impact wrench. I've had this about 3 years, and it's been the best investment I've ever made. I haven't had an error in a long time, and now we're going to put the tire and wheel on the passenger side. Pretty much till you're to this point, you have it licked if you've got it back this far together. After I snug them up there, I sort of know the magic spot where to stop, and I believe these get torqued to 100 foot-pounds. I'm not exactly sure at the moment, but like I say, I do believe that's what it is. And we're just working in the star-shaped pattern. We'll snug them back up. Like I say, it saves a lot of twisting and turning the impact wrench. And now we're going to put the hood prop back on. This, again, pretty much that little tab sitting down sits in the one hole, and the threaded hole's where the bolt goes that holds it to the core support. And there it's in place, and we're going to take and turn the bolt into it here. Again, like I say, just a couple threads in, and then we'll go get a wrench and we'll finish tightening it. And I'm going to take and put it here, the holder in place, just to be sure it does go back where it should, which, yep, no problem. And we'll tighten that up. That was one of the easier steps of it. And here is our hood bolt. And if you look on our hood bolt, it's like a pivot nut. It's got that like bushing built right into it, and that's what the hood hinges up and down on. Gotta love technology. Again, the prop rod eliminates hood hinges, and that little bolt eliminates hood hinges too. Money saving all sorts of ways. And lifting this up into place. An assistant's probably not a bad idea, but I successfully got it up in place. And if you look here, I will take and use the prop rod to hold it. But again, I assume no responsibility if you do this yourself and the hood flies back and breaks your windshield. And the bolt goes in from the outside of the fender. The nut goes on the inside is what I'm saying, and the pivot's on the outer edge. And then just start our nut on. And now at this point it's not going to fall off, and do the same on the passenger side. I got our bolt in, and going to put the nut on. Now they just need tightened up, and again, hood safely is not going anywhere. Okay, ratcheting wrench comes in handy on tightening these. It's not and just a regular wrench. It's not the most user-friendly to tighten them up. And again, while you're tightening them, watch the windshield, because like I say, you're turning back towards it. Wouldn't want to slip and crack the windshield. And don't ask me why, but around the edges, like right where you'd hit that, seems to be one of their weak spots. That's where to finish up, I'm tightening with the wrench away from the windshield, just to straighten it, and we'll just tighten the one up here now on the passenger side. Like I say, now this one you're turning away from it. And once those are tightened, that takes care of the hood installation, with the exception of making sure it opens and closes nice. Okay, before I go any farther, because this has been tore apart a while, I'm going to spray some lubricant here on the hood latch. What I'm using, it's what I had available, some chain lube. There's better, there's worse things to use, but yeah, I had it, and I'm going to take and carefully go to shut this. There's nothing worse than getting the hood shut and latched that you can't get back open. I've been there before, and it wasn't pleasant, and it doesn't want to shut easy. And now I'm looking up, because again, this hood was off for a long time, sitting in the corner of the garage. The safety latch, you'll see, it's sticking. We're going to spray a little bit of the lubricant on that and get it freed up. And give it a nice little shot. And now we're going to try it here. Again, go slow and easy. Don't, after you put a hood back on, make sure you do shut it nice and easy in case something is catching. But there, we're going to push it, and it went right down in place. Latch nice, and it's like I say, no give in it. That means there's little rubber stops, and it pops open easy. And we're going to come here, and we're going to open it up one more time and shut it, and it should be functioning just fine. No problem on that. Now we're going to put the guard over the wiper area to keep the leaves in that, well, sort of out. Some fails. You've got to set it down around where the wiper transmission sit, and getting it lined up with where the screw holes are. Just a little matter of some adjustment. And that's pretty much in place. All right, part of this is broke on the corner of mine from beating ice and that over the years, but starting on the driver's side, here's the locations of the screws that hold this in place. And like I say, working gradually over, show you there. You can see a little bit more damage over the years from the ice and that. And like I say, I put plenty of screws in it, little Torx head to hold it in place. Does seem sort of overkill for a piece of plastic that sits tight against the windshield and between the hood. Now we're going to start, I'll start tightening in the middle. There's two right in the middle. Tighten those up, and then I'll just start working. Go one towards the right and one towards the left, back and forth until you tighten them up, just alternating back and forth so I don't hopefully break it any worse than it is broke up over the years. Like I said, I didn't realize what bad shape this was getting in. A good excuse there. I haven't done it in a long time to go do a junkyard run and maybe see if I can't find one. Of course, they're all probably in the same shape. And this T-handle I like using. I bought a set of these at Harbor Freight, these T-handle Torx. And if you also see, if you want to use it like in a right angle, there's one on the end. But the T-handle, I think, makes it fairly easy to do. I believe these are a T15 on the size. Size was actually wore off of this. I couldn't read it, but I grabbed the 20 first. It was too big. Then grabbed this one, so it almost has to be the 15. And we're getting them tightened up. And finally, the last one over by the radio antenna. And that'll be the last one, and this will conclude tightening these up. And after certain, it will not fall out. Alrighty, now we're going to put the windshield wipers back on, starting on the one on the driver's side. There's the little latch that holds it in place when you pull it off, and our washer fluid hose. And just take and reach. Be careful when you put that plastic piece on. You don't shove it where you can't reach it, just so you can connect it back up. And after you connect the washer hose, make sure it's lining. Make sure the wipers are off when you do this in the park position, and push down, and then just lift up on the wiper and push in on the little tab, and down the wiper comes. And just do the same thing on the passenger side. Again, don't forget to hook up your washer hose. I do like the washers built right in the wipers on these. Not everything has that, but it does work good. And there's that one in place, and we're going to check them out. They come on, they're wiping where they should, and even the washers are working. And shut them back off and be sure they perk in the right place. Alrighty, now it's time to put the antifreeze in. My radiator could use flushed out, and this is the coolant that came out of it. Down the road I want to take and flush it out good, but this is recycled, and we'll get her dumped back in. I always try to dump in as much as I can before I even start the vehicle and let the air pockets work out. You can hear in between, it's sort of gurgling in between. And there she's filled up with one more little bubble. And there we are, just started it up. Temperature gauge is down at the cold mark. Started up, put the heater on full tilt. And there we're up to normal, that's where it always ran. And it's heating good. And let's go for a drive. And thank you for watching. What's that?